Humans left without a word, and the council paid dearly. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. Imagine a universe on the brink of war, where every decision could tip the balance. The Galactic Council, made up of powerful species from across the stars, has just realized the price of underestimating humanity. But the humans have already made their decision, and they are about to walk away in silence, leaving the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. What happened? And what price will the Galactic Council pay for their arrogance? The humans had already made their decision. As the last of the human forces withdrew from the battlefield, Commander John Markson stood on the war-torn planet, his eyes locked on the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a red glow over the devastation, the remnants of battle scattered across the land. The earth, scarred and broken, seemed to echo the pain of a conflict that had torn through it. The sound of distant explosions and the faint hum of retreating ships filled the air, but there was an unsettling silence in John's heart. He had fought alongside his brothers and sisters in arms for months, and now, all that was left was the bitter taste of victory that felt like defeat. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to pay the price. But as John looked out over the vast, empty expanse, a thought gnawed at him. Was this really the best course of action? Was leaving in silence the right move? The humans had turned their backs, but at what cost? John had led his troops through hell and back, but even now, as they retreated into the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something behind, a promise unfulfilled, a debt yet to be paid. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but the human way had always been different. It was about standing for something greater, something worth dying for, not just winning at any cost. And that was exactly what they were doing. They weren't giving up, they were making a statement. The Galactic Council had taken their place for granted. They had made the mistake of believing humanity would crumble under pressure, that they would bow to their superior technology and vast armies. But humanity had proven time and time again that they would fight for their right to exist, to thrive, to be free. As the last ship lifted off the ground, the stars ahead beckoned them forward. But John's mind was elsewhere. The Council had been told, over and over again, that they were making a grave mistake. They had ignored the warnings. Now, as the human fleet vanished into the darkness of space, the Council was about to find out just how far humanity was willing to go. John walked to the communications console aboard his flagship, his fingers brushing the smooth surface as he keyed in a command. The transmission was brief, but it would send a message far beyond the reach of the war-torn planet they were leaving behind. We are humanity. And we will not be silenced. The price you will pay for your arrogance will echo through the stars. The transmission was sent. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was the silence of victory, the silence of a people who had chosen to walk away, knowing that they had the strength to return whenever they chose. John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The human forces were gone, but the message had been sent. The Galactic Council had made their move, and now it was their turn to answer. The price of underestimating humanity had just begun, and it would be paid in full, in ways the Council could never have anticipated. As the human fleet disappeared into the vast expanse of space, Commander John Markson couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settling in. The decision to leave in silence had been made, but there was no guarantee that the price they had extracted from the Galactic Council would be paid willingly or swiftly. John knew this was just the beginning. The silence they left behind would soon be filled with consequences, consequences that no one, not even the Council, was prepared for. The stars stretched ahead like endless possibilities, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on John's shoulders. The message had been sent, but it was up to the universe to decide how it would be received. As the ship sped away, heading for the safety of the deep void beyond the reach of the Galactic Council, John sat alone in his quarters, lost in thought. He stared at the vast screen in front of him, watching the stars blink by as the flagship's systems hummed steadily. His crew was quiet, all of them feeling the same tension that hung in the air. John had been in countless battles before, but this was different. There was no enemy to fight now, no clear path ahead. The battle had been won, but the war? The war had only just begun. The commander leaned back in his chair, his fingers idly tapping the desk. He thought back to the moments before the fleet had departed, the final moments he had shared with his team. They had fought alongside him, bled alongside him, and now, they had made the impossible decision to retreat, to step away from a battle they couldn't win the traditional way. They had made a statement, one that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated, not to be ignored. As the thought of their departure lingered in his mind, a sudden transmission cut through the silence of the bridge, startling John from his reverie. It was from an unknown source, a direct message to him. The transmission flickered for a moment before it cleared, revealing a shadowed figure. The figure spoke, its voice distorted but still recognizable. "Commander Markson, we have been watching," the voice said, cold and devoid of emotion. "Your decision to leave has been noted. You are not the only ones who have been watching the Council's arrogance. Prepare for what comes next. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, and it is time for humanity to take its place among the stars. This war was never truly about victory, it was about sending a message. You have done that. Now, the Council will pay." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving John with a chill running down his spine. He didn't know who had sent the message, but one thing was clear, humanity's move had set off a chain of events that would reverberate through the galaxy. The Council's arrogance had created enemies far beyond the battlefield they had just left, and now, those enemies were about to make their presence known. The implications were staggering, but John knew he had to focus. The message was a warning, and it was clear, the Galactic Council was not the only force to fear. As the human fleet drifted further into the darkness of space, the weight of their decision became more apparent. The silence they had left behind was no longer just the absence of sound, it was the silence of anticipation, the silence before the storm. The Council would pay, but so too would anyone who had wronged humanity. The war was not over, and the price for underestimating humanity would be paid in ways that the Council could never have imagined. And it was John Markson's duty to make sure they understood that, no matter how long it took. As the days passed and the human fleet continued its journey through the depths of space, the tension among the crew was palpable. No one knew exactly what the future held, but they all knew one thing for certain, the path they had chosen was irreversible. Commander John Markson stood at the bridge of the flagship, staring out into the endless void. The stars seemed so distant now, as if mocking him with their calm and serene beauty. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. The fleet was silent, save for the hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of communications. John's thoughts kept returning to the mysterious transmission, the one that had sent a chill through his spine. "Prepare for what comes next," the voice had said. The words had haunted him, lingering in his mind like a dark cloud, and now he couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater than the war they had just fought was brewing. It wasn't just the Galactic Council they had to worry about anymore. The message had made that much clear. As much as John tried to push those thoughts aside, he knew they couldn't afford to ignore the warning. The silence they had left behind was no longer just an absence of sound, it had become a signal to others, perhaps those who had suffered at the hands of the Council or those who, like humanity, had been oppressed by the arrogance of the ruling elite. The galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, and now humanity had ignited a spark that might set it ablaze. Hours turned into days as the fleet moved further from the battlefield, but the unease among the crew only deepened. John had done his part, he had led them through the chaos, made the hard decision to walk away, but he couldn't silence the voice in the back of his head urging him to prepare for the unknown. He had seen enough to know that the Council's wrath was not something to be taken lightly, and while they had sent a message, it was far from over. The human race had made an enemy of the most powerful political force in the galaxy, but that wasn't the part that concerned John. It was the aftermath, the unknown players who might now be drawing attention to humanity's sudden rise, the factions who had been watching, waiting for an opportunity to act. As if on cue, the ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Eliza Reyes, approached John's console, her face grim. "Commander, we've received another transmission. This one's from a different source," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. John looked up, his curiosity piqued. "Put it through," he ordered. The transmission crackled to life, and a figure appeared on the screen. The face was unfamiliar, a human, though dressed in clothing that John had never seen before, marked by symbols that didn't belong to any known faction. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a hint of respect in his expression as he addressed John. "Commander Markson, I assume you've received the message we sent," the man said, his tone direct. "Humanity has made its move, and we have been watching. We have our own reasons for staying in the shadows, but your actions have not gone unnoticed. The Galactic Council will soon realize that there are consequences for their arrogance, and they are not the only ones who can make them pay." John's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the second message he had feared. The Council wasn't their only enemy, and now it seemed like others were stepping into the fold. The man continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We have resources, alliances, and information that could change the course of this war. You've proven that humanity has the will to act, but now it's time to act with purpose. The Council is powerful, but their power has a limit. Together, we can expose their weakness and turn the tide." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving John to process what he had just heard. His mind raced, the implications of this new alliance, or perhaps, this new faction, crashing through his thoughts. They had sent a message, but now they were being drawn deeper into something much larger than they had ever anticipated. The humans had chosen to walk away, to leave in silence, but now they were being asked to step back into the fight, not just for survival, but for something far greater, the chance to dismantle the very system that had tried to crush them. John turned to his crew, his mind made up. The mission was not over. They would not sit idly by and let the Council continue its reign of terror. Humanity had made its mark, and now it was time to see how far they could push. "Get ready," John said, his voice calm but resolute. "We've just made some powerful friends, and it's time to show the Council what happens when you underestimate humanity." The crew nodded, a sense of renewed purpose in their eyes as the flagship powered up for the next stage of their journey. The silence they had left behind was about to be filled with action, and the universe would soon realize that humanity was not to be ignored. The price was just beginning to be paid. As the human fleet continued its journey, now heading into the unknown, Commander John Markson could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The silence they had left behind was deafening, and the tension among the crew was palpable. The message had been received, not only by the Galactic Council, but by others, those who had been watching from the shadows. The unknown transmission, the one that had promised an alliance, had set a new course for humanity, and now John felt the burden of leading them toward it. The unknown faction had made their intentions clear. They were ready to fight alongside humanity, but only if they could prove their worth. The Council was no longer the only threat humanity faced. There were forces at play, unseen and unknown, and they had to decide whether to trust them or face the consequences alone. As John paced the bridge, his mind raced through the options, weighing the risks. The situation was dire. They had already made enemies of the most powerful political entity in the galaxy, but now they had to decide how far they were willing to go, what alliances they were willing to form, and how much they were willing to sacrifice to bring down the Council. It was a delicate balance, one that could tip either way. The crew had come to trust John's judgment, but even now, as the stakes grew higher, he could sense their unease. The silence they had left behind was not just the absence of sound, it was the silence before the storm, the calm before the galaxy erupted into chaos. The unknown faction had given them a choice, an opportunity to change the course of the war, but was it too good to be true? Were they truly allies, or would they turn on humanity when the time came? John knew that trust was something earned, not freely given, but the opportunity to fight back, to push back against the Council, was something humanity couldn't pass up. If they were to have any chance at victory, they had to take the risk, no matter the cost. As the fleet moved further into the unknown, the first signs of change began to appear. Ships from the unknown faction, sleek and powerful, appeared alongside the human vessels. They moved in perfect synchrony, as if they had been working together for years, though John knew better. This was the first step, and it was a test to see how far humanity would go to honor their end of the bargain. Would they stand firm and show their strength, or would they falter and lose everything? John stood at the helm, staring out into the vastness of space, the stars ahead seeming to shimmer with a promise of what was to come. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity was no longer alone in this fight. The universe had taken notice, and the Galactic Council was about to learn that the cost of underestimating humanity was far higher than they could have ever imagined. John turned to the crew, his face set in determination. "We've made our move," he said, his voice steady. "Now we wait. We trust those who have pledged to stand with us, and we prepare for what comes next. The Council may think they've won, but they've only just begun to feel the consequences of their arrogance." As the human fleet and the unknown faction ships moved in unison, heading toward the heart of Galactic Council space, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. But this time, they weren't walking alone. The Council's grip on the galaxy had been challenged, and humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species they once were. They had proven their strength, their resolve, and now they would show the galaxy just how much they were capable of. The war was far from over, but humanity was ready. The Council had made its choice, and now it was time for them to face the consequences of that decision. As the human fleet and the unknown faction ships advanced deeper into Galactic Council territory, the atmosphere aboard the flagship was thick with anticipation and tension. Commander John Markson stood at the command center, his eyes focused on the holographic displays, which showed their path cutting through the stars. The unknown ships flanked them on either side, their sleek forms moving with precision, as if they were part of a well-rehearsed choreography. John had been in battles before, but this felt different. This was no longer just a war for survival, it was a war for the future of humanity, and they were walking into the heart of enemy space. The Galactic Council, the same organization that had dismissed humanity as weak and inconsequential, was about to face the consequences of its arrogance. Yet, despite the Allied forces now at their side, John knew this would not be an easy victory. The fleet was still vulnerable, their position precarious. The Galactic Council had resources and power, and they would not give up control without a fight. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and the message John had received from the mysterious faction only added to his unease. "We have our allies, but we still need to prove ourselves," he muttered to himself, as he adjusted the course on the navigation console. "We must show the Council that we're not just fighting for survival, but for the galaxy's future." His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his communications officer. "Lieutenant Eliza Reyes." "Commander, we've received a transmission from the Galactic Council," she said, her tone calm but tense. "It's a direct message." John's heart skipped a beat. He knew that any communication from the Council could be a trap, but he also knew that they would be watching every move the human fleet made. "Patch it through," he ordered, his voice steady. The transmission flickered to life, and a cold, mechanical voice came through the speakers. "Commander Markson," it began, "this is your final warning. You are to cease all hostilities and surrender immediately. If you continue this path, there will be consequences that even your species will not survive. You have underestimated the might of the Galactic Council, and now you will face the full force of our power." The message ended abruptly, leaving a sense of foreboding hanging in the air. John turned to Eliza, his expression hardening. "Prepare for the worst," he said. "The Council has already made their move. Now it's our turn." As the fleet continued their march toward the heart of the Council's domain, John's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The transmission had been a warning, but it had also been a sign, one that the Council was taking their threat seriously. They had overplayed their hand by underestimating humanity, and now they were being forced to respond. But John knew that this wasn't just about a battle, this was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was not to be ignored. As the fleet neared the outskirts of Council space, they received another transmission, this time from the unknown faction they had allied with. The transmission was brief but clear: "Prepare yourselves, Commander. We will be with you when the time comes. The Council will not escape the consequences of their arrogance. John nodded to himself, the weight of the moment settling over him. This was it, there was no turning back now. The future of humanity rested on the outcome of this battle, and it would take everything they had to overcome the might of the Galactic Council. But they weren't alone anymore. They had allies, they had strength, and most importantly, they had something the Council could never comprehend, the will to fight for what was right. The tension in the air was palpable as the fleet closed in on the heart of the Council's territory. Every crew member on board knew that the time for words had passed, now, it was time for action. The Council's warning had been heard, but humanity's response was already in motion. As the first of the Council's ships appeared on the horizon, John took a deep breath. The battle was about to begin. The battle had begun. Commander John Markson stood at the helm of the flagship, his fingers gripped tightly on the console as the first wave of Galactic Council ships came into view. The cold, sterile sound of the communication system filled the bridge as Lieutenant Eliza Reyes called out updates, her voice unwavering despite the tension in the air. Multiple Council ships on approach, Commander. They're signaling for us to surrender, but they'll be in range in less than 5 minutes, she reported, her eyes scanning the incoming data. John's mind raced, but his face remained stoic, betraying nothing of the apprehension he felt. He knew this moment would define everything. They had spent so long building up to this fight, and now, with the fate of humanity on the line, they were finally facing the forces that had tried to crush them for so long. The entire human fleet, accompanied by their mysterious new allies, was poised to strike back against the might of the Galactic Council. The ships ahead were massive, their sleek, metallic forms gleaming under the distant starlight. The Council's fleet was a symbol of power, a collection of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. And yet, here they were, standing against it. John's breath was steady, but his heart pounded as he watched the first of the Council's ships lock onto them. Their weapon systems powered up with a soft hum, and John could feel the tension building, the anticipation hanging thick in the air. Commander, they're locking weapons, Eliza's voice cut through the silence. Shall we return fire? John hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. The entire fleet was depending on him. They had to strike first, but they also had to show the Council they weren't just seeking destruction, they were fighting for survival. Hold fire for now, John said, his voice calm but firm. Let them make the first move. We need to send a message, but we're not here to wipe them out just yet. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was nothing but the silence of space between the fleets. Then, as if on cue, the first blast erupted from one of the Council's ships, a brilliant beam of energy that shot through the vacuum of space, streaking toward the human fleet. Return fire! John commanded, his voice sharp and decisive. All ships, engage! The chaos that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. Explosions erupted across the dark canvas of space as the human fleet responded in kind, their weapons tearing into the hulls of the Council's ships. The unknown faction's vessels, which had been moving alongside them in perfect formation, opened fire as well, adding to the fury of the assault. John watched the unfolding battle from the command center, his mind constantly calculating, analyzing. His crew was fighting with everything they had, but there was still a nagging fear in the back of his mind. The Council was a formidable enemy, and though they had allies now, it was uncertain how long they could hold their ground. As the battle raged on, the first major hit came. A Council ship fired a devastating blast that struck the side of one of the human frigates, sending a shockwave through the fleet. The ship's shields faltered, and the vessel groaned under the impact. John's heart sank as he watched the ship's systems begin to fail, but he quickly forced the thought aside. They couldn't afford to lose focus. All ships, stay in formation, he barked, rallying his crew. We can't give them an inch. The human fleet fought back with a ferocity that stunned the Council forces, but John knew this was just the beginning. As the battle stretched on, both sides took heavy losses, and the gap between them seemed to grow wider with every passing minute. The mysterious faction fighting alongside humanity was proving to be as ruthless and efficient as the Council, and their partnership was becoming more evident with each strike. John watched as one of the alien faction ships sent a powerful blast into the heart of a Council destroyer, obliterating it in a fiery explosion. It was a sight to behold, and for a moment, the commander allowed himself a breath of relief. They were making progress, but the war was far from over. In the distance, more Council ships were appearing on the radar, signaling that reinforcements had arrived. The battle was about to escalate, and there was no turning back now. "We need to end this quickly," John muttered to himself, as he turned back to the bridge. The fleet was holding strong, but time was running out. The future of humanity, and the galaxy itself, rested on their ability to outlast the Council's might. With a final glance at the ongoing battle, John's resolve hardened. The message had been sent. They would fight until the last. And they would win. The battle raged on, the void of space illuminated by the flashes of energy blasts and explosions. Commander John Markson stood at the helm of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the unfolding carnage. His crew fought with everything they had, but the Council forces were relentless, throwing wave after wave of ships into the fray. The fleet had made its stand, and now there was no turning back. The human ships, though outnumbered, were proving their resilience, firing back with a precision and fury that seemed to surprise even the Council. The unknown faction, who had promised to stand with humanity, was holding their ground as well, their ships moving in perfect coordination with the human fleet, adding to the barrage. But despite their unity and strength, the battle was growing more intense by the minute, and John could feel the weight of the decision they had made pressing down on him. The human fleet had taken significant losses already, and the Council's reinforcements were arriving fast. He could see their massive warships approaching, their dark silhouettes cutting through the void like predators. The odds were beginning to stack up against them. A deep sense of urgency gripped John. His thoughts raced as he calculated their next move. They couldn't afford to wait. The longer they stayed in this fight, the more likely they were to be overwhelmed. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Carlos Diaz, his face set in a grim expression. "Lieutenant, we need to end this now," John ordered. "Send a signal to the rest of the fleet. We're going to make one last push." Diaz nodded, his fingers flying over the controls as he sent the orders to the fleet. Within moments, the human and alien ships began to reorganize, their formation shifting as they prepared for the final assault. John's gaze never left the screen, his focus unwavering. He knew this was it. The final push. It would either break the Council's forces or destroy them entirely. But there was no middle ground. As the human ships moved into position, John could see the Council's flagship coming into range. It was the heart of their fleet, a symbol of their power, and if they could take it down, they could shift the tide of the entire battle. But the Council flagship was heavily defended, surrounded by a swarm of smaller vessels. It was going to be a tough fight, but John had seen worse odds before. "All ships, prepare to fire on the Council flagship," John commanded, his voice sharp and clear. "Focus all firepower on the enemy flagship. This is the moment we've been waiting for." The human fleet moved into formation, their weapons charging as they aimed for the Council flagship. In the distance, the massive ship loomed like a titan, its weapons ready to strike. The tension was palpable as the two forces prepared for their final clash. And then, it happened. The first volley of shots from the human fleet hit the Council flagship, striking its shields with a thunderous impact. The ship rocked, but it held strong, its defenses barely holding. The Council's retaliatory fire came swiftly, a barrage of plasma and energy blasts tearing through the space between the two fleets. The human ships returned fire, their weapons lashing out with unrelenting fury. The battle between the two forces was like a storm, an explosion of energy and destruction, and it seemed like the universe itself was holding its breath. The Council flagship's shields began to falter, cracks appearing under the pressure of the relentless assault. John's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold, but there was no time to relax. They had to finish it. "All ships, target their engine core," John barked. "If we can take out their engines, we can cripple their entire fleet." The human fleet focused all their firepower on the Council flagship's vulnerable engine core, unleashing a massive barrage of weapons fire. It was a calculated risk, one that would either destroy them or give them the edge they needed. John held his breath, watching the screens. The first explosion came from the flagship's engines, a massive burst of energy that lit up the entire battlefield. The human fleet cheered as they saw the flagship begin to list, its once mighty hull now a burning wreck. The battle was far from over, but the Council's flagship was no longer a threat. The human fleet pressed forward, their renewed energy and determination pushing them to the final stage. John knew that the tide had shifted. The Council had made their move, but humanity had answered with more than just firepower. They had answered with resolve, with unity, and with the determination to fight for their future. The human fleet pushed forward, destroying everything in its path, and the Council's forces began to falter. The end was in sight, and John knew that, no matter what happened next, humanity had already proven that they could stand up to the galaxy's most powerful force. The battle, though still raging, had shifted decisively in favor of the human fleet. The Council flagship, once a symbol of their unchallenged power, now floated helplessly in space, its once imposing form reduced to a smoldering wreck. Commander John Markson watched from the command center as the remaining Council ships, seeing the devastation of their leader's flagship, began to break formation. They were faltering, just as John had hoped. The human fleet, though battered, was not yet defeated, and now it was time to press their advantage. John's voice cut through the tension in the air. "All ships, prepare to engage. We finish this now." There was no hesitation in the crew's response. They had fought too long and too hard to let this moment slip through their fingers. The Council's ships, seeing the inevitable, began to retreat, but it was too late. The human fleet, with the unexpected support of their mysterious allies, moved in unison, their weapons unleashing a final, coordinated barrage that ripped through the remaining enemy ships. The sounds of explosions and fire were deafening, and John could see the tide of the battle turning in their favor. The remaining Council forces scattered, leaving nothing but debris and the echo of their defeat. As the last of the enemy ships were destroyed or fled, John allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had struck a blow against the most powerful force in the galaxy, and they had won. The fleet fell into a brief silence, the calm after the storm. John stood up, his legs feeling the strain of the hours of battle, but he remained steady. He turned to Eliza, who was staring at the screens with a mix of disbelief and relief. "It's over," she said softly. John nodded, but his mind was already turning to what came next. The Council had been defeated, but that didn't mean the galaxy would suddenly be at peace. The repercussions of today's battle would ripple across the stars, and humanity had to be ready for whatever came next. "Not quite," John replied, his voice firm. "This is only the beginning." A few moments later, a new transmission came through. This one was from the mysterious faction that had fought alongside them. The voice on the other end was clear, and this time, it carried a sense of respect. "Commander Markson, the battle is won, but the war is far from over," the voice said. "You've shown the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated, but there are many more forces at play here. The Council's defeat is just one piece of the puzzle. We have much work to do." John listened intently as the voice continued. "We will be watching, and we will continue to support you in the coming struggles. The galaxy is changing, and humanity has a pivotal role to play. Keep your resolve. The future is uncertain, but you've proven you can shape it." The transmission ended, and John felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The battle was over, but the future remained uncertain. Still, in his heart, he knew that humanity had taken the first step toward something greater. The Galactic Council might have been a powerful enemy, but humanity had proven that they were not only capable of surviving in this galaxy, but of thriving. John turned to his crew, who were all watching him expectantly. "We've done what we needed to do today," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "But there's more to be done. This galaxy is vast, and there are many who will challenge us. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is not weak. We've shown them that we can stand up and fight for what we believe in. And now, we're going to continue that fight." The crew nodded, their expressions resolute. John knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but as long as they stood together, humanity would continue to rise. They had proved their strength today, and they would carry that strength forward into the future. The battle was over, but the story of humanity's place in the galaxy was only just beginning. And with that, the flagship turned its course, heading toward new horizons, ready to face whatever came next.